James Bond had been away for a while, so when he returned in 1995, there was a new energy, thanks to a new director and a new actor in the lead role, and also a new boss, new studio, new producers. James Bond was back in GoldenEye.
That's the trouble with the world today. No one takes the time to do a really sinister interrogation anymore.
Pierce Brosnan was the new James Bond in the first film set after the end of the Cold War, and it's also a film that set out to counter increasing criticisms of Bond cliches by addressing them head-on, while still having fun.
So you destroy every vehicle you get into?
Standard operating procedure.
It's very much a James Bond film that manages to have its cake and eat it too. Thanks, now I want cake. GoldenEye tells a traditional Bond tale of a villain's grand scheme in a world that was vastly different from the time Ian Fleming had first conceived of the character in the 50s. The world had changed. There was the removal of the Iron Curtain, women speaking,
with a twist,
cars with 5 forward gears,
5 forward gears,
samplers, and of course, computers. The last Bond film, Licence to Kill, had not performed well in the US on its 1989 release, but that was merely a hiccup. A start had been made on a third film to star Timothy Dalton, but was knocked off course not by a team of oilmen led by Bruce Willis, but by legal disputes. Basically, the owner of United Artists, MGM, was nearly bought out by one company who couldn't actually pay, and washing dishes was not on the cards. Another company swooped in and proceeded to sell or license out MGM's assets to pay for the deal. Part of that was selling TV rights for Bond films cheaply, despite MGM UA only being co-owners of the Bond franchise, with Bond producer Albert R. Broccoli's company. To say Cubby Broccoli was pissed was an understatement. But, unless you're cauliflower, don't fuck with broccoli.
We've only just scratched the surface.
Reading the tea leaves, Timothy Dalton elected not to put a down payment on that Caribbean island he had his eye on, and instead moved on with his career, fairly safe in the belief that his days as James Bond were now behind him, as were all dreams of becoming King Tim, ruler of the island nation of Daltonia.
Bullshit!
The lawsuits took a few years to sort out, and work on a new Bond film would start around 1993. By now it was clear they would need a new actor in the title role, but changes behind the camera were plenty. Cubby Broccoli's stepson, Michael G. Wilson, had been working on the Bond films in various capacities from the early 70s, where he would eventually become an executive producer and a script contributor. Broccoli's daughter, Barbara, began working on the films starting in PR, and later worked as an assistant director and associate producer. Beginning with GoldenEye, the pair would produce the Bond films going forward, as by now Albert R. Broccoli had stepped down from the daily grind of making Bond films in very exotic locations.
The pleasure, I'm sure, was all mine.
Martin Campbell came on board as director, and would prove to be somebody who could balance the action and getting the best out of his actors.
All right, in London, April's a spring month, whereas in St. Petersburg, we're freezing our butts off. Is that close enough for government work?
Pierce Brosnan had almost been James Bond in 1987, but had contractual difficulties precluding him from accepting the role. The early 90s saw Brosnan's career in a weird patch, where he was well known, but not a big enough star to carry really big movies. Then the chance to play Bond came back, and he would use it as a stepping stone to reach what would be his ultimate goal, starring in the Mamma Mia cinematic universe.
Numbers were never my strong suit.
Even though he was the preferred choice in 1987, Brosnan wasn't instantly offered the role. Other actors were sounded out, and some were even preferred over Brosnan. But in the end, the role he had wanted for so long was finally his. The question was, what would he do with the role now that he'd gotten it? And also, I suppose more critically, how big would his hair get as James Bond?
The name's Bond. James Bond.
A dam, somewhere in the former Soviet Union. A black-clad figure with big hair jumps from the top of a dam as a way to break into a secret installation. Huh? What? Just go with it.
Forgot to knock.
It's 007, and he's brought along a friend, 006, Alex Trevelyan. Things don't go so well, and Alex is killed by Colonel Uramov. Years later, Bond is taking a drive with a colleague sent to evaluate him when on a mountain road he decides to race against a woman in a Ferrari.
Ksenia Sergeyevna Onatop.
Onatop?
Onatop.
Bond would later face off against Ksenia Onatop at the casino the night before she ends up stealing a stealth helicopter where it's used to steal something to control GoldenEye, a secret Russian satellite with EMP weapons. Electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear explosion really screws with electronics, but as I have my Game Boy wrapped in foil and stored in a microwave, we should be okay. One weapon is fired by Xenia and her boss, the now General Uramov, which, I suppose, talk about failing upwards, which destroys the complex at Severnaya. One survivor missed by Xenia's bloodlust-filled shooting spree, Natalia, tries to find out what happened to her colleagues. One of them, Boris, is not so dead, and he turns out to be involved. Bond, meanwhile, has been sent to Russia to try and find out how the stolen stealth helicopter ties in with the incident at Severnaya, where he gets some information from CIA agent Jack Wade and then former rival Zhukovsky, before finding out the man he's been looking for is in fact his long-dead best friend, Alex Trevelyan. Trevelyan wants to avenge his parents and destroy the financial records of London, though honestly, he'd probably do more damage to the financial sector if he aimed the EMP satellite at a Caribbean tax haven. Natalia and Bond join forces to take down Trevelyan at his complex in Cuba. He has a complex, all right.
What if you find forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women? For all the dead ones you failed to protect.
GoldenEye took any and all cultural criticisms lobbed at Bond films over the years and addressed them directly in the film with a nod and a wink.
Someday you have to make good on your innuendos.
Pierce Brosnan's Bond takes the criticism in his stride, ignores Timothy Dalton's very serious take, and crafts a persona for himself that was basically like a fan standing between Sean Connery and Roger Moore trying to get an autograph from both at exactly the same time without letting either know which one is their favourite. Brosnan's Bond, or Brosnand, has the ruthless streak and the lighter touch,
Strangling the cat.
while adding a little vulnerability. He does show that he's in pain in between the quips and the killings. In short, Pierce Brosnan makes a fine Bond. Izabella Scorupco as Natalia is a computer programmer who is new to the world of high-stakes espionage, yet manages to keep her cool with dealing with male egos.
Stop it! You're like boys with toys.
Scorupco is another example of a Bond woman role that did not lead to an awful lot afterwards, at least in English-speaking films.
And what rank do you hold with the motor vehicles department, Mr. Bond?
Famke Janssen as Xenia is to date a rare example of a woman in a Bond film who did go into bigger things.
Wait for your turn.
Janssen's character is basically somebody who gets off on death and does come perilously close to stealing every scene she's in. Sean Bean, the guy who only ever appears on the cover of the first of something, gives us a series first, an ex-MI6 agent gone rogue, and he's a 00 to boot. Trevelyan is reasonably likeable, despite being an oily villain, but he's also played by Sean Bean, so the character's end shouldn't be surprising to anybody who's followed his career. Also, seen Bean? No, I prefer Blackadder.
You've made me a very unhappy man.
Alan Cumming gives us Bond's first evil hacker, Boris.
I am invincible.
An important character, not only because he's great to watch because he's such a shit, but because this is the first time in a Bond film where computers are a weapon. And they also now looked like the sort of machines that people had in their homes at the time.
IBM compatible with 500 meg hard drives, CD-ROM and 14.4 modems.
Yeah, but can it run Crisis? Godfrey John as Uramov is just this side of ruthless, only slightly less psychotic than those around him. Joe Don Baker was of course the final villain of The Living Daylights, and here appears as CIA man Jack Wade.
Did you check her out?
Head to toe.
He had of course co-starred in director Martin Campbell's TV thriller Edge of Darkness in the mid-80s.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
Judi Dench is the new M head of MI6, which mirrors the female head of MI5 at the time. Her M will become much more integrated into the plots of some films, rather than just handing Bond a folder at the start of the movie.
If you think for one moment I don't have the balls to send a man out to die, your instincts are dead wrong.
Samantha Bond, no relation, I looked it up twice, was a new moneypenny, not necessarily smitten with Bond as previous moneypennies had been, though her acerbic innuendo-laden banter with Bond has been kicked up a few notches.
Good night, James. I trust you'll stay on the top of things.
3.
One of the few cast holdovers was Desmond Llewellyn as Q, back again, but now he's a little friendlier with his newfangled Bond.
Don't touch that. It's my lunch.
Robbie Coltrane makes his first appearance as former rival Zhukovsky.
Irina! Take a hike!
And Minnie Driver appears almost as an extra. So it's a good cast, even if many of them are bravely putting on different takes on Russian or Russian-like accents.
Better luck next time. Slugheads.
Brosnan, under Martin Campbell's guidance, really had given the Bond franchise a massive shot in the arm, possibly V12, and GoldenEye comes across as a confident and exciting start to the new Bond. Of course, with the help of hindsight, we would see Brosnan's later films having a very hard time measuring up to the series' new high watermark.
What an unpleasant surprise.
We aim to please.
Bond's traditional home of Pinewood Studios was unavailable, so when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, or in my case, lemon curd cake. The production took over an old Rolls-Royce factory in Leavesden and turned that into a studio. GoldenEye would be the only Bond movie to film there, but the studio would become the production base for the Harry Potter films after it was bought by Warner Brothers. One element of the film that perhaps didn't come off as expected was the score by Eric Serra. His electronic sound works in some scenes, such as the dam, but during post-production it was noted that there was something important missing, namely the James Bond theme. John Altman was given the job at the last minute to create some more traditional music to cover the gaps, particularly during the film's signature tank chase. The movie's theme song, GoldenEye, was sung by Tina Turner and written by Bono and The Edge from U2, and would become one of the few modern classic themes from a Bond movie. With the end of the Cold War, some minor filming was undertaken in St. Petersburg, but the bulk of Russian locations were filmed elsewhere. Where? Just anywhere they didn't need an army of bodyguards just to make a damn movie. There's the dam jump, which was filmed in Switzerland, and many Russian exteriors were shot in the UK. That's real Monaco, but the giant dish in Cuba, when it wasn't a model, was filmed at the giant radio telescope at Arecibo in Puerto Rico.
The CIA has no knowledge, no involvement, absolutely nothing to do with your insertion into Cuba.
It wouldn't be a James Bond film without product placement, from fancy watches to a fancy new BMW Roadster that is barely used in the movie. GoldenEye, though, was the source for one of the greatest licensed tie-in products of all time. Nintendo was about to release its new Nintendo 64 console to take on Sony's then top-selling PlayStation system. Nintendo had managed to snare a Bond license and gave it to one of its premier developers, UK-based studio Rare, who translated the movie into the then new 3D first-person shooter genre. GoldenEye 007 would be released in 1997 and would become the gold standard of how to do a game based on a licensed product. The cartridge would go on to sell a then impressive 8 million copies, and is still lauded as one of the greatest video games of all time. Just the announcement of a re-release decades later got fans so excited that there was a spike in Google searches for waterproof chairs. However, like the film, the follow-up games from different developers did not have the same verve or cultural impact. Also, like the film, some of the follow-ups were more than a little bit shit.
Yes! I am invincible!
Computers playing an important part of the plot was matched by their increasing use in the making of the film. The title sequence was a mix of computer-generated imagery and composited film elements to create a new style, reminiscent of the sequences created by Maurice Binder on previous films, but updated for a new generation of moviegoers. The film still mainly uses practical effects, including some excellent miniatures from effects legend Derek Meddings, with GoldenEye being the last project he worked on before his death. It is a 1990s film, so the characters act as second-year psychology students, analysing each other or themselves, just in case we missed the memo.
You think I'm an accountant, a bean counter more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
I did miss the memo, so it is very nice to get a refresher every 5 minutes.
Another stiff-ass Brit, your secret codes and your passwords.
How can you be so cold?
That's what keeps me alive.
James Bond, Her Majesty's loyal terrier, defender of the so-called faith.
The last time I had a conversation where I listed somebody's character flaws to their face, it did end with a bottle smashed over my head. Okay, so it was a plastic water bottle, but it was half full. Let me tell you, it smarted.
We are having a pleasant drive in the country, and you've got to bring psychology into it.
So as a movie with a lot of firsts, GoldenEye also had new writers. Several scribes had a go at a draft of the script, but it was enlivened by the one-liners added by Bruce Fierstein.
7.65mm. Only 3 men I know use such a gun. I believe I've killed 2 of them.
GoldenEye saw the Bond films finally refer to Bond as an MI6 operative rather than just an operative of the nebulous British Secret Service. Real MI6 headquarters in London also featured as an establishing shot. The Bond movies would go on to show MI6 headquarters bombed more times than Auntie Beryl was at parent-teacher nights. How she made principal, I'll never know.
It's Boris' password. He plays word games. It's what I sit on, but I don't take it with me.
Chair,
like I said.
GoldenEye was the first James Bond film that I'd seen in an actual cinema, and even all these years later, it still holds up as the best Bond movie of the 90s and of Pierce Brosnan's era. It was an actual hit when released in 1995 and reinvigorated a franchise that many had decided was past its prime. Few Bond films would surpass GoldenEye, and even then the best one was also directed by Martin Campbell. The best Bond films all have their signature moments, scenes which even casual viewers can recognise. GoldenEye has the dam jump and the tank chase through St. Petersburg. And then of course there's the inevitable wait to see how far into the film Sean Bean's character would make it. For the record, Sean Bean's character dies at around the 2-hour 4-minute mark, a fact that we will now enter into the Necrobeanomicon, or the Book of the Dead Bean. You may not be able to teach an old dog new tricks, but give him a martini, a gun, a girl, an Aston Martin, a couple of villains, some gadgets, exotic locations, some shitty music, fantastic stunts, and a script dripping with cute one-liners.
Once again, the pleasure was all yours.
And you have the recipe for a really fun time. GoldenEye remains one of the very best James Bond movies.
Bond, come back alive.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
I said I'd be here, huh? Yo, a ring!